Today I'm giving a presentation on stakeholder views of AI in agriculture and forestry. So we'll spend about 10 minutes walking through stakeholder adoption of climate smart agriculture and forestry and digital agriculture. Then we'll talk about my research focused on stakeholder needs related to climate change, digital agriculture, and artificial intelligence. And then a majority of the time will be spent to dig into the climate files, which I hope you all had a chance to review. Then we'll bring you all back for the last 10 minutes to kind of reflect on the activity. So before jumping in, I wanted to give you all some context about me to explain how this research got started. So before starting with AI Leaf in 2023, I worked with farmers in Nebraska, running a Nebraska extension program called Weather Ready Farms, teaching farmers about climate smart agriculture and forestry and on-farm disaster preparedness. When I started my master's at Cornell, I continued working for Weather Ready Farms and also began working with the Cornell Climate Smart Farming program, continuing my work teaching farmers about climate adaptation and mitigation. So when I was first introduced to AI, I was really skeptical because in my experience working with farmers, they're a very doubtful and somewhat resistant to change group. And there's a lot of farmers that I worked with that didn't believe in climate change. And we all know that climate change is highly politicized and there's a lot of misinformation about it in rural communities. The Weather Ready Farms program was intentionally called that because more conservative farmers might be willing to talk about climate impacts like disasters. So in my experience talking to farmers, I found that they were observing these climate impacts and increases in the frequency and magnitude of extreme weather events. But as soon as you call that phenomenon climate change, they're completely tuned out. So I thought that AI Leaf's goal of creating AI climate smart agriculture and forestry decision support tools would be met with a lot of pushback from farmers. And I truly wasn't sure if farmers and foresters would be willing to adopt these AI Leaf tools. My personal experience was also verified and supported by the literature on the adoption of climate smart agriculture and forestry. When we look at the adoption of climate smart agriculture and forestry, we see this low and slow adoption process. However, there is a slow increase of adoption over time, but with climate impacts increasing and the importance of agriculture to reducing global greenhouse gas emissions, this adoption rate is very concerning. We need farmers to be implementing these practices to mitigate global impacts to climate change, but they also need to implement them because it's necessary for them to adapt in this new age of climate change. So we can see with this low and slow adoption trend when we look at something like cover crops, for example, which for cover crops, you can see that as of 2022, only 4.7% of total US cropland was planted with cover crops, which has this practice of cover cropping has been around since the 1970s. And kind of a similar vein, we see this low and slow adoption trend in no-till and reduced tillage. And the no-till movement has been around since the 1960s, and it is one of the most commonly adopted climate smart agriculture and forestry practices. You can see that our big cash crops, corn, soybeans, and wheat, that adoption of no-till is in an upward trend towards mass adoption. But this process has taken over 60 years to reach this level, even with high outputs of data showing the long-term benefits of no-till and with extension outreach efforts. So if we look at something like a newer climate smart agriculture and forestry trend, which is going to be agroforestry, which even though it's a newer movement, it's an ancient cropping system practice. You can see that about 1.7% of all farm operations in the United States reported at least one agroforestry practice, which is in comparison to 2022 is an increase. But again, only a small portion of farmers are adopting these practices. So why aren't people adopting climate smart agriculture and forestry? Well, there's pretty significant barriers to adoption. I mentioned beliefs before, and that many farmers do not believe in climate change, or that they believe in climate change, but they don't think it's a serious threat, or they don't think it's human caused. For example, there was a study in 2024 of Wisconsin farmers that found 56 farmer respondents believe climate change is happening. In contrast, 26% believe it's not happening, and then the other 18% were unsure. In my experience, the results of the study are representative of the trends of US farmer beliefs about climate change, with a small majority believing in climate change, with the rest not believing or being unsure. And when you compare these climate change belief results to the rest of the US, we find that farmers as a group are much less likely to believe in climate change than the rest of Americans. This is also, there's also a major barrier related to the cost of implementing these practices. Climate smart agriculture practices like agrivoltaics, for example, which involve grazing animals and solar panels, have extremely high upfront installation costs. There are also payment for ecosystem services and carbon markets that financially support the adoption of climate smart agriculture and forestry practices, but these can be really challenging for farmers to navigate. You can also find barriers related to knowledge on how to implement these practices, as management may require a high level of expertise to maintain, and farmers may just not know about these practices at all. There's also a lack of available labor, and how time intensive these projects can be, which also impacts adoption. And social barriers also prevent adoption. So farmers are deeply connected to their peers. So if farmers are not around them, are not adopting these practices, they're also not likely to adopt the practices. This is not an exhaustive list of climate smart agriculture and forestry adoption barriers, but you can see that adopting these practices is challenging for farmers. When we look at the adoption of digital agriculture, we find a very similar story. The USDA came out with a report in 2023 that shared that about 27% of US farms and ranches reported using precision agriculture technologies. These technologies included remote sensing, in-ground sensors, targeted spray systems, and automated mechanical weeders, and then decision support tools. There's also this low and slow positive trend of adoption over time with digital agriculture, but it's similar that it's only a small minority of farmers are implementing these technologies. The barriers to digital agriculture adoption is very similar in cost, and the lack of technical skill required to use these tools. Farmers may also have challenges if they can't interpret the data from the digital ag tools, but you also find specific barriers different than climate smart agriculture, like data privacy, where farmers don't want to share their data with either the government or with private industry. There may also be internet and connectivity issues that prevent them from using digital ag. We also find that large-scale farms are more likely to use digital ag. So many small farmers feel that the tools are not very accessible or tailored to their operations. So when we think about adoption and how farmers and really people make decisions, it should be with an eye for risk perception. Risk perception is the common denominator to determining if a farmer is going to adopt a practice or a tool. It seems pretty intuitive, but understanding farmer risk perception can give us an idea of their likelihood to adopt. Farmers are constantly evaluating trade-offs and benefits to implementing new practices and technology, and they are evaluating risk and trying to determine the likelihood of a negative impact and the probability that whatever change they make is likely to have the desired impact that they want. So have any of you seen this diffusion of innovation model before? You can just give me a thumbs up reaction in the chat. Okay. So the diffusion of innovation model, okay, some thumbs down. That's good to know. The diffusion of innovation model also discusses risk perception, suggesting that adoption is related to reducing uncertainty about the expected consequences of an innovation. If you've ever seen, no, the diffusion of innovation model is a social science framework developed by Everett Rogers to explain why and at what rates new technologies spread through a population. It suggests that people take up practices and activities slowly at first, then there's this rapid growth period followed by this plateau of saturation. And it classifies people into innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and then skeptics. So when we think about AI for climate smart agriculture and forestry, we know that we're probably on this left side of the curve. But being able to place us on the adoption curve will help AI Leaf identify potential end users. So how will stakeholders react to the expansion of AI in agriculture and forestry? At what level they perceive AI as a threat? Will the potential likelihood that this technology will benefit their operation be stronger than that perceived risk? And will the effects of climate change increase risk to the point that stakeholders will be more willing to adopt new technologies and practices? So these are the questions that led me to lead this AI Leaf stakeholder needs assessment research to collect the views, experiences, and challenges faced by agriculture and forestry professionals to inform the development of new AI-driven decision support tools and technology that will help farmers, ranchers, and foresters and other stakeholders mitigate and adapt to climate change. The goal of this research reaches all of AI Leaf's focus areas, including research, education, and workforce development, broadening participation, which includes building more equitable and accessible tools, and collaboration nexus, which encompasses partnerships, government, and industry. The goal of this project is to inform the development of these AI decision support tools, involve stakeholders in all of the stages of technology development, identify barriers to adoption of AI in agriculture, and then also to identify strategies to address the needs of stakeholders. So the underlying goal of this research was to identify the pathways to understand stakeholder risk perception of AI in agriculture and forestry, and to potentially identify solutions to reduce uncertainty about AI's climate smart agriculture and forestry decision support tools. So with the guidance of Dr. Allison Chatterton and the support of the AI Leaf EWD team, I conducted 10 focus groups from spring 2024 to 2025 with 88 agriculture and forestry advisors. And we selected as advisors rather than talking to farmers directly, as these advisors worked kind of with a larger, more broad group of farmers and foresters, and we wanted to have a more general idea before talking to talking to farmers directly about AI. So for some additional background, in case any of you are unfamiliar, the Cooperative Extension System is a national U.S. public outreach network that translates university research into practical education and technical assistance for communities, especially in agriculture. So all of our AI Leaf universities are a part of this land grant university system. You may also hear the terms 1862 land grant or 1890. So in 1862, that's when the land grant extension system was created. And then 1890 and starts to add additional land grant universities that are historically Black colleges and university. And then you also have the creation in 1994 to include tribal colleges and universities. So there are extension in the US, there are county offices in every single county in the United States. So there's around 3,000 county extension offices, and I think it's around 30,000 employees. So we were talking to, in 6 states, we talked in California, New York, Indiana, Purdue, that area, and then New York, California, Colorado, to extension educators. And then we also talked to the leaders of these USDA Climate Smart Commodities projects. So the Climate Smart Commodities projects was a USDA initiative launched in 2022 to support pilot projects that expand markets for communities producing climate smart practices with the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and sequestering carbon. So this was a $3 billion project with 140 pilot projects nationwide. So we talked to 17 of the leaders of these projects that work directly with farmers. And that leads us to the climate files. So the climate files was an activity that I created and that we ran at the year 2 AI Leaf annual meeting. And it pulls out the key findings and de-identified quotes from those focus groups. So in this activity, I want you to become the detective to uncover the needs of your extension stakeholder and talk as a group and identify solutions as you are all kind of multidisciplinary experts on how you could help this stakeholder. So I will send you into breakout rooms and then you can review the files as a team. And then I will pull you all back in for the last 10 minutes